Good evening and welcome to this third session of TiE Institute. Last Thursday we had a wonderful session on his entrepreneurship for you and entrepreneurial process. We had a fascinating entrepreneur who did mathematical modeling for Goldman Sachs to come and speak on entrepreneurship where he used his risk assessment techniques. Today we have a wonderful panel of three speakers. We will start with Assaf Weisz, and I will introduce Assaf and then we'll begin right away. Assaf is co-founder and partner at Purpose Capital. He leads the company's strategy and design practice. Prior to this, he was founder and executive director of Young Social Entrepreneurs Canada. In Purpose Capital, he works on infusion of impact investment into other ecosystems such as post-secondary education, aboriginal economic development, and subsidized housing. He's a writer and speaker on using business and finance to move society forward and was recognized as an Ariel de Rothschild Fellow for Social Entrepreneurship in 2012. I have requested Assaf to speak on social systems and intervention, and he has brought about a wonderful spin to the whole topic, and we will look forward to it with interest. Please help me welcome Assaf.
Good, so my name is Assaf. Lalit asked me to speak about social systems, and I decided to go rogue a little bit and to put my own spin on it. Well, I'm one of the founders of Purpose Capital. We're an impact investment and advisory firm. We work with investors and ventures to help mobilize as much capital as possible into impactful ventures. As part of that, my job is to meet every day with entrepreneurs. And one of the things that I like about that is through a series of conversations, you actually learn a lot about how different industries work and how different systems work. And so while I started out with what I would consider a pretty generic view on various social systems, I've started to see it through a lens that I actually want to take you through today, and in a lens that the most successful entrepreneurs that I know of and hear about and are looking at them through. So we'll go with this. So first thing that I wanted to touch on was that we like to think about the problems in social systems, but it should be the other way around. Every problem is an opportunity or has an opportunity underneath. And so as an entrepreneur, I think the key piece is to be able to see, where people are not being served, where incentives are in the wrong place, or incentivizing the wrong thing. That's a perfect opportunity for someone to come in and do it better. So this is the lens that I actually want to look at systems through. There are a lot of other lenses. Let's look at them through business models. Because I think that one of the things that you'll find if you look at the various systems that you care about, whether it's energy, agriculture, education, you name it, is that there are all sorts of interlocking business models there, and they produce either good incentives or bad incentives. The judge for good or bad being whether they serve the constituents that they need to serve and that kind of thing. And so as an entrepreneur, you want to be able to look at business models so that you can change them, because I ultimately believe that systems change when business models change. And we'll go through a number of examples of this. And I think that you'll see in whatever cause or whatever area that you're working in is that the history of how it was shaped that way has a lot to do with the business models that emerged over time. And I think it's one of the reasons why innovations which have a lot of promise for society initially might go sour. And one example that I point to is for example, in insurance, which actually started as a cooperative model, and then sort of turned into something where insurance companies are incentivized not to make payouts. So as business models change, the effect that they have on people drastically changes. So I actually want to take a look at the process by which business models change, or one key process, and that's in market disruption. And I want to do that with you. So we're going to try to do it a little bit in an interactive way. So don't be shy, and we'll discover it together, okay? So what I mean by market disruption is essentially referring to a theory of disruptive innovation by Clay Christensen. If you have some time after, I highly recommend that you look into his work. He's a Harvard professor and an entrepreneur himself. And he observed over time that markets were constructed in a certain way and changed in a certain way. And so what he saw was that in the initial stages of a market, what you'll have is a group of high-paying, high-demanding customers. And part of the reason for that is they're the first people that can afford to participate in it. And so all the solutions that are provided for them are really complex and very customized to their needs. And over time, what happens through technological innovation or through business model innovation is that a new group comes into the market and offers a simpler solution that's ultimately not as good, but brings the cost down significantly and enables new people who weren't able to be consumers before now to become consumers. And then this happens again and again. So one example where you might see this is actually in the creation of microfinance, where you had a financial services industry that had a certain view on what merits creditworthiness and had certain assumptions around who could be served and who couldn't. And what Muhammad Yunus did in the 1970s was actually turn a lot of those assumptions on their head and find that there were other ways by which you could measure creditworthiness, and there were other ways that you can actually reduce the scale and the administration costs of loans. And by doing that, was able to extend financial services to millions of people around the world who previously were cut out of that system. Okay? So, if I'm correct about what the next slide is, no. This is just a note around what to look for. If you're looking at a system that you care about, does anyone know who this person is? Yes?
Jeff from Amazon?
Yes, Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, pretty smart guy. And one of the quotes that I really take away from him is that your margin is my opportunity. And so in a system, whenever there are people with high margins or businesses with high margins, that to you as an entrepreneur is a signal that there's room there to play. That you might be able to create some kind of innovation that enables you to come in at a lower cost. Okay? So I want to give you examples of a few companies that you may know, and then to actually talk about how they disrupted the market that they were in, or how they're in the process of disrupting the market they were in. Okay? So is everyone familiar with Zipcar? Yes. Okay. Great. Does anyone want to take a guess? There isn't a purely right answer. But I'd love to hear some insights from the room around what they did that was innovative. Yeah?
We changed the structure of car rentals. No paperwork, no big checkups. You have to just log on. Instead of a weekend or days, but you can actually rent right now.
Great. So they actually changed the way that people rented cars. And they made it a simplified process. Okay. What else?
So more of a co-op for cars rather than a rental, per se.
Right, okay. So more of a co-op for cars rather than a traditional rental. Unfortunately, they got bought out by a big rental company, so we'll see if that model lasts. But that's beside the point.
They automated the process, you don't need a human interface.
So they automated, right? You don't need to walk into a branch necessarily to actually take out a car. Okay. Anything else? Last one, yeah?
Well, they disrupted the view of the need of car ownership.
Excellent. So that's what I had down. They basically changed something that used to be owned individually by everyone into something that could be shared. Now it's true that there was the rental industry before, but there are some significant differences, as was pointed out by some people in the room. And so what they're essentially doing is letting people have access to something rather than making ownership the barrier to access. Okay. And as a result, I think they count something like every zip car on the road reduces the demand for individual purchase of cars by like 5 to 1, something like that. Those are their numbers. So, Expedia, I wouldn't call them a social venture per se, but they're exemplary of a model that is really, really powerful and taking shape in a lot of different industries. What did they do? Yeah?
Integrator.
Integrator. Can you explain?
So you can combine travel, hotel, car, all in one spot.
Okay, great. So, and apparently they actually, so you can buy more than just the flight itself. You can make all the follow-on decisions. And from what I hear, the hotel side of it is the highest margin part of the business. Great. What else? Yeah.
Aggregator.
Aggregator. I think you say integrator.
Integrator.
Aggregator. Can you elaborate a little bit?
Well, they aggregate all of, let's say, flight options, so you're able to choose the least expensive option versus having to check individual airline websites and probably pay a higher price. for the same
Great.
flight.
So they provide visibility across the entire field, right, and give the consumer way more decision-making power, or way easier decision-making power. Yep.
They also force competition amongst the competitors in the market, right? Who can get the best rate?
Right. So they force competition. I'm just repeating it for volume. They force competition in the market so that ideally it actually brings down the rate. Okay. So what they did in my view, and none of those things are wrong. They're all right. What they did in my view is a process called disintermediation. Before Expedia, before any of these other sites, if you wanted to book a flight, where did you go? What did you do?
Call the travel agent.
Call a travel agent, right? So what they essentially did, intermediary means someone in the middle. Disintermediation means being able to take them out and allow the two sides to come together in a much more automated, much sleeker way. So Expedia is an example of a business that actually disintermediated that industry. Okay? And I think we'll show a few other examples of where that's happened. In the process of disintermediation, you actually cut out the cost of an intermediary. So ideally, you're actually reducing the price for consumers. Airbnb? Has anybody used it before? Yeah?
It's a cool one.
It's great.
You can like the place out.
What about Airbnb? What did they do? Yeah?
So one day to change the social experience of traveling, because instead of going in a new place where you're with strangers, you sort of know someone, like right after that you have other than the office, like a hotel industry, but they changed the going to a strange country.
Right? So they created an entire, no, please repeat.
They changed the whole social aspect of traveling to a strange country. Because right now, like when you book, like you already have like an insider into a strange country that you're traveling to.
Excellent. So it gave a completely new experience to traveling that was already more social and not as lonely. Anyone else? Yeah?
They found the sweet spot between hotels and hostels, which created there was a void that they tapped into, that margin, if you will.
Okay, great insight. I hadn't thought of it that way before. Where you're saying they found a sweet spot between the hotels and hostels. And maybe one more?
But it's value to an unused place for the time that you can actually sell. So you can actually have that thing be used for some other purpose, like renting it to people, giving them a better experience.
Right. Excellent. So they're actually uncovering tons of unused assets, right? We have so many rooms or so many extra spots that people have that just aren't in use. And so what they did was they enabled the people to become their own sort of hotels or to manage their own little enterprises. And as a result, if you scan across the Airbnb website, you'll see hundreds, sometimes dozens, sometimes hundreds of locations in major cities where people can stay, which are in the neighborhoods. They provide a sort of local context to it, and most importantly, they use assets that weren't used before. They increase the efficiency. So rather than needing necessarily to build new hotels all the time, to house people, you can use existing infrastructure.
I just would like to add one thing.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, they create aspirational thing for the consumer to hang out with interested people and to stay in the places that they never thought they could stay because they can afford, because they stay in a little room in a very fancy house,
Right.
and they can hang out with cool people. I think that's the umbrella for the website.
Totally. So they found there's all sorts of really.
Yes, experience.
I think, you know, some of the nicest hotels are set up to look like people's living rooms. Well, now you can actually stay in people's living rooms.
Yeah.
And meet the people as well. Okay? But Airbnb for me is something that is not normally thought of as socially impactful, but I think incredibly so, because it's on the vanguard of a movement of collaborative consumption models, which, like Zipcar and like others, are finding ways to, instead of continuing to produce more and more and more inventory of things, we can just use the amount that we have and share it more effectively. That reduces the strain on raw materials and on land and so on. So I think that the collaborative consumption movement, for anyone interested, is a really interesting thing to look at in terms of increasing the efficiency of how we live as a society. And what I noted there, I don't know if you can see it well in here, is that they essentially unlock unused inventory. What about Khan Academy, Coursera, edX, sort of more broadly? Yeah.
Coursera and I guess Khan as well, I'm not sure about the other ones, basically liquefied in a way the education model. So it brought universities and courses that professors actually teach out to be free to the public.
Excellent. That's right. Anyone else? Yeah.
Actually, I use the ETX, and it's very interesting. Like, you have all these different lectures, and you actually course like whole courses from like well-known universities like MIT, Berkeley, and it's really interesting. I couldn't go there, but at least I can now see the lectures and learn a lot from them.
Absolutely. So this all started as the result of it. Is there one more? Yeah.
I was just going to say, they had a certain capacity, and by doing this, they breached that capacity. So now instead of 200 people that can take a course, 10,000 people can take a course, and they can study them, and they can improve materials and research how people learn online.
Exactly. So they opened it up, and this all started with an experiment from Stanford. There was a professor who taught artificial intelligence. He decided to do an open course and run the course in the class at the same time. And so they didn't have any of these companies or anything set up. And what he found was, I think it was something like 70,000 people signed up to that course. 20 or 17,000 finished. So a lot of people didn't make it, but actually 17,000 people finished the course in artificial intelligence. And when they actually compared it to the scores, when they aggregated it with the scores of Stanford students in class, some of the highest scoring people, the majority of the 1%, were people who were not in Stanford. There were people somewhere in the world taking this course. And so what they hit on was this realization that, wait a second, there are smart people all over, and maybe they don't have access to this education. And so why don't we open this up? This might seem really problematic for universities where you pay, however much a year for the content. But what they discovered was that they could actually just move up the value stack. So what do people go to university for? Degrees, right? So the experience, maybe the network. And so what sort of the standard business model was for universities to sell you the content. Because content was delivered by professors, it was really hard to turn that into a technological commodity, right? And what these groups figured out, or what these schools figured out, is that actually, why don't we just give away the content for free? And what we'll do is we'll find the best people, the smartest people we can in that course anywhere in the world. And if they're really that good, we'll give them a full scholarship to go to the university. Why would they do that? How do they make money that way?
Research.
Research, yep.
You recruit them.
The reputation of the university goes up if you have the best participants.
Right? So the reputation, they sort of earn reputationally, and ultimately some of those people are going to become really successful and become part of the alumni and contribute back. So if you look at the US today, there's something like 3,000 or 4,000 universities. Very few of them are Stanfords and Harvards, right? You can mention most of those top 30 by name. And the rest exists solely because in order to get a job, you have to have a degree. And so they're sort of middling them. So they're selling you the content. What these top tier universities are selling you is a network. And a sort of a value-added opportunity. So they found a way to extend this education out to everyone. And as a result, they actually flipped their major business model on its head. There are a number of top schools that are participating in this. U of T, I think, has joined up to both Coursera and edX. And this looks like a potentially really disruptive business model to higher education in the coming years.
MIT has had an open courseware for a fairly long time.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Though it hasn't been as sort of widely.
It's not been participative in the sense you can't write exams, but whatever they deliver out there, it's available on the web.
Right. Okay, great. So they basically took something that that the industry generated a lot of money from, and therefore charged people a lot of money for, and they found a way to actually make that free or really, really cheap. Okay. We spoke about Muhammad Yunus. I sort of gave this one away. So essentially what they did was they found a way to extend financial services to non-consumers. And there's a lot to be said for the people who are not consuming in the system are often people who need to, who are cut out of it because of affordability. Kickstarter. Everyone's familiar with Kickstarter? How many people have bought something from a Kickstarter campaign? I have as well. How many people have actually run a Kickstarter campaign? Okay. So I ended up buying lucid dream inducing glasses. That did not work. Maybe they might work. I'm happy to lend them out. But it was sort of a cool way to get access to new product. So what is Kickstarter doing that is sort of potentially disruptive? Yeah?
Opening the investment market to consumers every day who are non-accredited investors.
Opening the investment market to consumers who are not accredited investors. Excellent. Anyone else? Yeah?
Anyone can create whatever product they want. It's a good enough product that you can raise money for it and actually build the product up there.
Right, so letting people create, and if people like what you're creating, then you actually get the money to do it. Great. Okay, so those two hit the nail on the head. If people have ever tried to manufacture something in this room, we were working with one of our first clients as a company was a group trying to manufacture a small plastic part, and they wanted to manufacture it in volume. In order to do that, they had to essentially get $50,000 in debt to be able to pay for a mold, and then to be able to spin out a few prototypes, and to be able to actually, then after, once they'd spent $50,000, then they would hope that people would buy it. That's how it used to work. There are not many people in the world who can afford to go down that road. Right? There are not many people who have access to those actual means of production. So what Kickstarter is doing is not just giving the world access to cool things. They've hit on a model where they actually change the order that money comes in and out. And in doing so, they let people kill two birds with one stone. Right? One, I need money to make the thing I want to make, and two, will people actually buy it? Well, now, if people can actually buy it before you make it. Everyone heard of the Pebble Watch? Yeah? So that was a $10 million project. I think it was Kickstarter's largest project at the time. Might have been eclipsed by now. A group of Waterloo students who created a digital watch. They went to a number of venture capital firms and tried to fund it. The VCs sort of laughed in their face, said, no way people will buy this. And then they sold $10 million of it on Kickstarter. and have now obviously gotten VC investment and now you see that Samsung is coming out with a smartwatch, and that's becoming sort of a new thing. So they proved the demand before they actually made the thing. For an entrepreneur, that is incredibly useful to reduce the risk that you have in creating something. And that, I think that not just Kickstarter, but the model of Kickstarter is something that can be expanded upon to enable people from all over the world to create stuff and then to get access to global markets to do it without having to be fairly wealthy to do that. So I covered this. They basically changed the sequence. Well, I think we have two more. Solar City. Anyone heard of them before? Yeah?
Companies that are like Elon Musk's brothers.
Right.
They essentially make solar panels for consumers. Or not for business. They just sell them. They distribute solar panels to people.
Right, so Elon Musk, who's this sort of James Bond entrepreneur, maybe more Iron Man appropriate. He was the inspiration for Tony Stark's character in Iron Man because he's so cool and flies around in a biodiesel private jet. He started Tesla, started SpaceX, did a bunch of other things. Didn't have time to start this company, but gave his cousin the idea for it and funded it. In order to put solar panels up on a house, you used to have to get the homeowner to pay, right? $20,000, whatever it was, $20,000 to do that. No wonder there weren't that many houses being covered by it. So what Solar City did was it actually flipped the model again. It got a group like Google, for example, and a few other investors to put in something like $200 million so that they would front all the inventory, that basically they would put it on people's houses for free, and in exchange, they would get the revenues of selling electricity into the grid for the next 20 years or so. Okay? And so doing that, and because of that, they've been able to cover it and are covering rooftops with incredible speed. So in the last three models, what you can see is the pattern that you can start to see is sort of making something more affordable for people. Finding a way to make it more affordable so that price isn't this huge barrier that lets people participate in that. MakerBot? Anyone heard of MakerBot? Yeah? Yeah? Has anyone ever used one? Okay. I've tried to, pretty unsuccessfully. It's a 3D printer. There have been 3D printers before. They were industrial grade. These cost anywhere from 80 to 200,000 plus. So certain labs could have them and this kind of things. What MakerBot did was it made a home scale one that could sit on top of your desk and is about the cost of a pretty nice laptop. Sorry?
It's about $2,000.
$2,000, yeah. And now there are models that are trying to come in cheaper. But they took this thing, the 3D printing, and exploded it out so that makers from all over maker communities anywhere in the world could start to use 3D printing. What is that useful for?
Everything.
Everything, okay.
Prototypes.
For prototyping. So as instead of sending the blueprints to someone and waiting a few weeks and having them come back, you can just use sort of software, plug in the specs that you want, and actually prototype within an hour or two, sometimes less. Okay, so really useful for entrepreneurs. But also I think it holds a lot of promise for people in general because it has the potential to basically do to hardware and to manufactured items what has happened in software, which is giving people the agency to create their own. Now that sounds like a pretty disruptive thing if you are a retailer or anyone selling hardware, right? But the opportunity for this is that people are able to actually manufacture the things that they need at home. So one example that I was given was you know, if your pipes are leaking, that theoretically down the road, you could actually just print out the new part that you need and put it in yourself. Okay, well, we're all going to be plumbers in the future. But this will have tremendous social implications if it's really taken out as far as it can go. There's always good and bad. There's always good and bad social implications. The downside might be that people working in retail or manufacturing might actually suffer from job losses. The upside is that lots of people can actually create things on their own and may be able to find all sorts of new business models within this new sort of paradigm. So I believe that's the last one. So characteristics of disruption, specifically ones that change society. They, through innovation, create a new product or a new service that is, at first, not as good as what exists. Right? The major sort of, the mainframe, the first generation computers were huge, had to fit a room. The first desktops were not as powerful, but over time became as powerful or more powerful than certainly what existed before. So they start out not as good, which is why people write them off. But they quickly advance and become better and better. And because they're able to make something not as good but cheaper, they can actually sell it to lots of people who couldn't afford it before. And because they can do that, because they reduce costs, they can actually increase access. This is not just in, this sort of spans all the way from financial services to laptops to all sorts of different domains. So if you're looking for a way to change a certain social system and the causes that are created by it, or the problems that are created by it, I would encourage you to look at 3 different levers. One is technology, so where is there opportunity for technology innovation or to bring to market a technology that would make something much cheaper and more widely usable. 2 is the methodology, how you actually, in what sequence people pay for it, how it's made, how it's delivered to people. All those things really matter in terms of who can access that as a consumer and who can't. And the third one is customers, who you're actually selling to and who is not being sold to. There are usually more people not being sold to than the ones that are. Yeah?
So I'm just thinking, one of the bigger disruptions is really to the current infrastructure that's set up. The change of the exact system today is one of the biggest disruptions, right?
So which systems? Can you give me an example?
Well, if you take the car rental kind of model, or you take any one of these hotel models, so that's a system, and you're actually disrupting that particular system.
Absolutely.
Which is an infrastructure that radically alters everything.
Absolutely. It creates disorder for the time being. And if you look at, for example, in collaborative consumption, Uber is another one, in the rideshare group. So Uber and Airbnb specifically have come up against laws that were in place to govern the previous system. And so in some cases, I think in New York and I think in Montreal, there were lobbying events happening to basically prevent people from being able to use Airbnb because the landlords were being cut out of that transaction. Okay. So something that is, you can usually recognize something that is transformative and disruptive by how many people it pisses off. And the more people, probably the better. So long, it necessarily threatens incumbents. Lastly, and then I don't know where we are on time.
Actually, we ran on.
Okay.
Questions if there are any.
So last piece, and then we can go to questions. Last thing, this isn't by rule, but it's just by observation. 3 business models that I think are going to face difficulty from here on out. Business models that rely on scarcity, that's going to be a problem. If your business model relies on you only you having something and you're incentivized to keep it that way, that could be a real problem, as especially now the physical world becomes easier to manufacture. 2, high margin human services. There's actually a great article in Harvard Business Review around how the consulting industry itself may become disrupted over the next decade or so. And it's something that may happen in the legal industry a lot. I'm aware of the house that I'm speaking in. But I'm sure they're not blind to it either. And then lastly, business models that are reliant on information imbalance, where you have to know more than the consumer. I think that's going to become a tougher sell over time as information just floods everyone's world. Okay. So with that, if there are a couple of questions, take them, and then otherwise I'll be here a little bit after as well.
Are there any questions now, or would you like to ask them again? Anybody? Assaf,
Yes.
thank you so much for a
There's one
wonderful
question.
Okay.
Maybe I'll ask it at the end. I'll ask it
No,
at
no,
the
go
end.
ahead. Please go ahead.
Okay, sure. Why do you do what you do?
Why do I do what I do?
Yeah.
Well, so what Purpose Capital does is we're essentially an intermediary between the investment community, all different levels of investors, of impact investors who want to create some kind of impact with their money, and impactful ventures or social ventures. And we do what we do. I do what I do specifically because I think that we need to disrupt the systems that we have on a major scale. One of the key barriers to disrupting everything else is the financial system and what people will invest in or won't. And so we are sort of we pick that as the lever to pull on. And I think that will unlock potential for lots of other things down the road.
Yeah, there's one up there.
Do you know which issue of HBR that article is in? On
The most recent one.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. I think it's the October issue. But
Okay.
it's available online.
Please.
Would you categorize all these as social systems? Or these are commercial systems?
I think they're one and the same. And maybe I should have talked about this before, but I actually think that these are different sides of the same thing. We don't live 2 separate lives. We don't live a social life and a commercial life. They're fundamentally the same, which is not to say that we should be consumers in every realm. What it is to say is that we're fundamentally affected by both. And that commerce and the rest of our lives is a constant conversation between them. And it affects who can participate and who has a chance to succeed in society and who doesn't. And so that's why when we look out into what social problems exist, I think we look at that as where are the major market opportunities? They're usually one and the same. So healthcare needs to be reorganized tremendously. Agriculture, energy, education, water, you name it. All of those systems are experiencing entropy on their own, and that creates a perfect opportunity for people with new intentions and good intentions to win in this round. And so that's sort of the way that we see it.
A great answer and a great presentation. Thank you, Assaf.